Welcome to Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm your host, Tom Flynn.
And I'm Chris Baker. We stand at the cusp of a new era in Alpha Flight, one charted by longtime nemesis of the show, Bill Mantlo. Just one issue for you today, folks, but there's so much to talk about with the changing creative team that we couldn't possibly do more.
The story so far.
For entirely justifiable,
totally justified
reasons, Alpha Flight founding member Snowbird, aka Narya, killed fellow founding member Sasquatch, aka secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langkowski.
While
the team collectively shrugged their shoulders and said, I get it. His soul ended up inhabiting the living metal box armor created by former Beta Flight member Genius engineer Roger Box, who seems to have joined the team along with former Gamma Flight member Madison Jeffries.
In an effort to secure a living flesh body for Walt, it's such
flesh.
He and Roger went interdimensional fishing and pulled an angry Hulk, kind of redundant, into Alpha Flight's rented Vancouver facility. The Hulk smashed through the box armor while Roger was phased inside, and Walt's soul is seemingly lost somewhere in the crossroads of all realities. We wish it well.
You really sound enthusiastic and warm on that one, Tom. Thank you for saying the polite words.
Sometimes you just gotta be polite.
You're a mensch. So we know that we have treated Mantlo as a boogeyman responsible for everything wrong with Alpha Flight, and I want to assure you listeners that while that has been fun, as we enter this new age, we're going to be taking Mantlo seriously and retiring our long-running Mantlo sound effect gag.
Hey, one less sound effect to edit in.
And with that, take it away, Bill.
Come on. We can't introduce it like that. How about one last hurrah, just for old time's sake?
All right, but just this once. We're here to take this series seriously. Alpha Flight number 29, titled Cut Bait and Run, cover date December 1985. Writer is Bill Mantlo. Artists are Mike Mignola and Jerry Taliok. Letterer is Jim Novak, colorist is Bob Sharon, editor is Carl Potts with Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief.
Before we go much further into this issue, it's probably worthwhile and frankly necessary to give a little bit of Mantlo's history. He is not revered in the way that John Byrne is. His career is quite a bit different from Byrne's, so where we could kind of, you could kind of know what Byrne went on to do, what he did before Alpha Flight, etc. It's worthwhile to definitely situate Mantlo. So Bill Mantlo broke into the industry in the early 70s at Marvel as an inker, eventually making his way up to penciler and then starting to write fill-in issues. Under Marv Wolfman's leadership, there were a lot of issues. I mean, there are always issues in comics with, or at the time there were anyways, of hiccups, script not being ready, an issue not ready, and so there's a delay. And Wolfman got sick of it, so he decided there always need to be fill-ins at the ready to drop in case of one of these problems. And Mantlo became kind of the king of the fill-ins. He ended up writing on almost every single series that Marvel did, which is actually kind of wild when you think about it.
He is wildly prolific. Just all over the place. Anywhere you needed something, you can put... I remember reading an interview with Jim Shooter. I think it was on his blog. But he was talking about Bill Mantlo, and he said, look, Bill was the best guy because, man, whenever we had a problem, I called Bill and I'd have a script the next day. Was it a good script? No, but I had it.
Well, that leads to another interesting point, is that while he was the king of the fill-ins, he was also known to write so fast that heavy editing was required. Shooter apparently had a file folder in his office in one of his drawers where he would add a page to it every time a Mantlo story, a finished version of Mantlo's story, that page had no words written by Mantlo in it. Like, he had written the story, Shooter had edited the hell out of it, and by the end of each year, the file folder was a ream of paper. So, that's really dick on Shooter's part, but it also speaks to kind of like Mantlo's creativity, that he could really kind of jam out stories, but at the same time, maybe not always the greatest quality. On that point of creativity, there have been accusations of a certain degree of borrowing to plagiarism, but though that's a lot of 70s, 80s comic history I don't got. So
yeah, man, my interaction with Mantlo so far on this project has mostly been incredibly creative and imaginative stories that don't always have the resonance that I'm looking for out of a comic book. But the creativity, boy, I don't think I've ever seen anything like what I've seen from Bill Mantlo so far. So the accusations of perhaps some borrowing I had not come across, but I also haven't read everything that he wrote because it's a lot.
Well, it's also the kind of thing where, because he did do so many fill-ins, you'd almost have to be reading the series or a lot of series at the same time and Mantlo's to see where he's maybe rehashing a story in order to create the fill-in. But having said that, he wasn't just a fill-in writer. Obviously, he has Alpha Flight here. He was the lead. Well, I was about to shudder at that one. He was the lead writer on ROM. He convinced Shooter to acquire the comics license for the Micronauts, which he then ended up writing and establishing all the lore for.
Oh, yeah, and that's a whole world of Marvel that has a very dedicated fandom. Micronauts have their people, man.
Yep. He created an interesting variety of characters, including White Tiger, Cloak and Dagger, were his creation. And he also had like a very specific interest in social justice issues and addressing disability rights, racism, a lot of things that is not exactly uncommon in Marvel, but in a couple of the articles I read on him, his willingness and frequency of approaching those topics was commented on by other writers at Marvel at the time. So that's interesting because some of the criticisms that we're going to be bringing to bear on him shortly.
Opposite of that, yeah.
but it was worth noting. So yeah, before we already know because we covered it last episode. Before this, he was the lead writer in Incredible Hulk, establishing a lot of the major Hulk lore that carries through to this day in terms of Bruce Banner's childhood. Moved on to Alpha Flight, and over the course of the 80s, he took advantage of a education program that Marvel offered, an educational reimbursement program, and put himself through law school at night, which eventually, the various things I read said that he was getting into more and more fights with Marvel management. Apparently, he tried to unionize some element of the company at one point. It all seems of a piece with what we've already discussed about Mantlo, but by the time he passed the bar, he took a job as a public defender, and was still writing a little bit for Marvel. That tailed off in the 80s, end of the 80s. He wrote at least one series, I believe it was the Invasion storyline for DC, but his comics writing was more or less done, it seems, by the 90s. Again, I could be totally incorrect on this. I'm just trying to provide some of an overview. Now, the thing that a lot of people know about...
We say all that to say this, you know?
The thing that a lot of people know about Bill Mantlo is that in 1992, while he was out rollerblading, he was hit by a car. The driver took off, has never been identified. Bill hit the ground really badly. Massive internal brain injury to the extent that he lost short-term memory. He, as of the most recent article I read, cannot walk, can move his arms, but doesn't have any real motor control over his hands, which when you consider that this is a guy that went to school for art, that broke into the comics industry as an inker and a penciler, there's something just really sick and awful about that particular fact. And there's a lot about what happened to Bill that's terrible. His medical insurance screwed him. Like, he was actually starting to make some progress towards greater recovery than what he is ultimately at now. And they yanked the funding. There's a lot that can be said about that as well. So there's a real tragedy to Bill Mantlo's life post his comics career. It's awful. It really does suck. There have been at least 2, if not more, fundraisers that have been organized for him to help with his care. I also saw a note that when Marvel Studios produced Guardians of the Galaxy, a compensation package for the rights to Rocket Raccoon, which is one of his creations, was negotiated, and that money helped a lot, helped square away his care. I don't know if it moved him out of the facility that he was in.
I believe the article said that his brother was able to move him into a better facility, which, I mean, if you're talking like that, look, everybody who has somebody in a facility, whether yours is the better facility or not. You know what I mean? Yeah, a lot of stuff happened after he was done writing comics. So you know, we're not going to let it affect anything about how we talk about, but now you know a little bit more about one of those names that you saw in comic books growing up, you know? It's kind of like Helen Keller. You only hear about the parts they want to tell you about, and then you don't hear about the rest of their life for a reason.
Yeah. So again, tragic, fascinating career in comics. Sounds like he was doing some very good work as a lawyer. But as Chris said, we're here to take your favorite series seriously, and that means critical analysis. And that means, like, when we think something doesn't make sense or sucks or what have you, we'll call it out. But we'll also absolutely call out the things that we think are fun or interesting, as Chris already mentioned, that wildly imaginative, whether it lands or not is a different thing, but the wildly imaginative is also worth praising, right? So that's us putting a little bit of context onto Bill Mantlo. If I got anything seriously wrong, please let us know. But I think I kind of covered the broad strokes fairly well there. So
thank you for doing the heavy lifting on this episode,
man,
Tom.
That sucked. That research is some of the worst research I've had to do for this show. And I mean, I would rather be talking about like fucking Quebecois separatists murdering dudes all day than read what I had to read about what happened to Bill Mantlo.
Well, let's get back to Bill Mantlo's issue number 29.
On the cover, we have an angry-looking Incredible Hulk, again, kind of redundant, standing over the defeated Alpha Flight and facing...
Again, kind of redundant.
And facing off against the spectral image of Sasquatch, who doesn't actually appear in this issue. Mignola's thick line work and style is immediately noticeable compared to the standard John Byrne work. We're going to talk about Mike Mignola and his art and his involvement in this title towards the end of this episode.
Well, and as I look back at issue number 28, the cover for 28 looks almost like Byrne was aping Mignola's art compared to that clean, crisp line work we usually get from Byrne. Almost like it was kind of smoothing the covers over. When you look back at the last like 4 or 5 covers in a row, the line work gets heavier and heavier as we move into this Mignola thing. So it's kind of a neat thing to see that, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I didn't find the cover jarring, except for the fact that when I look back at older Byrne ones, I was like, oh, well, this doesn't have that same delicate realness to it. We open with a standard full-page splash, picking up where the cliffhanger left off, with the Hulk punching directly through the Box armor's chest, which immediately sends Box spinning into a body horror crisis regarding his physical body and the metal body he is fused with.
Mantlo and Mignola then give us a double-page spread to show us their new take on these characters.
Puck, the hirsute acrobatic dwarf in a unitard who had previously been watching the science fishing double feature while smirking and drinking beer, jumps into action and calls out orders as if he was the field leader. He is both central to the page and central to Mantlo's initial construction of this team.
Puck sends Madison Jeffries over to help Box, as Jeffries' mutant power to mentally manipulate metal and technology could help repair the Box armor and ensure Roger emerges unscathed. Aurora is overwhelmed with having lost her lover and is only saved from being crushed by a tumbling Box by her twin brother, the flying speedster Northstar.
Puck does his best to keep the Hulk's attention and buy Jeffries time to stabilize Box. Without Sasquatch on the team, Alpha Flight suddenly finds itself lacking in the bruiser department and is completely unequipped to deal with the Hulk in downtown Vancouver.
Nominal team leader,
she's not nominal. She is the team leader.
You wrote it! What are you doing to me here?
Tom, I can't believe you would say that about Heather Hudson. You are so mean, sir, undercutting a woman in authority like that.
The totally human Heather Hudson turns to founding Alphan Shaman to use his mystic powers to help, and Shaman goes full emo, explaining his recent failure to save his daughter Elizabeth, aka Talisman, has left him questioning his abilities and purpose in life. Apparently, the medicine bags Shaman uses to pull whatever he needs out of it is like Thor's hammer Mjolnir. You have to be worthy to wield it. Also, just a quick note here, there is a lot of exposition happening on these pages, across these pages, almost as if you're jumping on to Alpha Flight for the first time.
Because you are. This is 100% within 2 pages. You're like, oh, this is not the book I read last month. And that's okay. I'm not saying that as a complaint.
No, but it is worth noting that this does feel like something of a reboot. And that's, again, new creative team. You're pulling from a very popular title, so maybe people are going to jump on over. All of that totally get it. We'll go into some of what that means for the book again towards the end of the episode.
Shaman is immediately sidelined from the fight and from the book entirely. A couple pages later, he quietly slips away from the team to go heal himself for like the next 6 issues. We won't see him for half a year. And it's no secret that we have a lot of respect for Dr. Michael Tuyungman and his struggles as a father and with failure to his family. I hate to see him slink away like this, but self-care matters, people.
The Hulk breaks through the wall and emerges into downtown Vancouver, pissed off, confused, and ready to smash everything until it looks like his desert home. Self-care takes many forms, people. In order to slow him down, Heather throws herself on the bull's back saying, "Smash all of Vancouver? Yes, I believe you could, monster. But you won't. Not while a single Alphan is capable of drawing breath." And a narration box says, "Heather McNeil Hudson may not possess any superpowers of her own, but she has a fighting heart that more than compensates. Unfortunately, her valiant effort to halt the Hulk goes unnoticed by both the brute behemoth and by her self-engrossed teammates."
I can already tell that there are a lot more exclamation points in this script than previously used, because it seems like every sentence that isn't ended as a question has an exclamation point, and that's weird. Little kid comics talk like that. 60s Avengers talk like that. Not mid, almost late 80s Canadians, you know?
Yeah, have you ever heard a Canadian say something that would require an exclamation point?
No.
And I'm related to some of them.
The only thing I have heard a Canadian say that requires exclamation point is elbows up. All right?
The twins have a very strange and, frankly, off-putting moment, which we'll get to in just a bit. The Hulk shakes off Heather and Puck, and this portion of the Hulk story ends as all Incredible Hulk stories end. Say it with me, folks.
And the Hulk leaps away. He isn't gone, but this first third of the story ends with the Hulk leaping away. Mantlo uses a very strict 3-act structure in his books that is very different than the vignette-based storytelling Byrne has used so far. It isn't bad by any means, but this is clearly not the book we have been reading so far.
Alpha Flight takes the opportunity to evaluate their options. Recall that when they met the Beyonder last issue, Northstar made the case that they should fight God, and here Aurora declares, that Hulk killed my Walter, our Walter, and I am determined to have vengeance. Apparently a desire to die in a foolish fight against power you can't comprehend runs in the family. Oh, and that our Walter? Yeah, that refers to Aurora and Northstar. I'm going to elaborate on this a bit further on, but yeah, this is really weird.
I am terrified of what you're going to tell me about this, because we established last episode that Aurora wasn't with Walt. Aurora's with Sasquatch. Does that mean that... Don't stare at me like that, Tom. All right. Madison Jeffries patches up the box armor, and Roger Box is able to phase out safely, saying, "Out! Alive! And whole as a legless cripple can ever be!" And this is not the last time such a statement will come from Roger in this issue, and in most of them moving forward. Mantlo has apparently some retrograde views about physical disabilities, because, man, Roger's whole thing is that he is not a real man because he doesn't have legs below his knees.
Again, this is what I was referring to earlier in the Mantlo history section that, I don't know. But, you know, maybe he's just trying to represent a particular kind of character. I don't know. We'll address it.
We are getting a lot of body horror right away from Mantlo, between stuff that happens here, stuff that happens in the very next episode, and everything that happens with Roger until he's done with the book. So there's a whole body thing happening here, and Roger is unfortunately in the barrel for it.
Having rallied her team, Heather leads Puck, Box, Northstar, and Aurora to go find the Hulk and lead him away from the city. A minor note, the narration box calls this Roger's lab instead of what Heather said last issue, their leased facilities.
And Roger takes responsibility for having put his lab in the middle of downtown Vancouver and then brought the Hulk to it later. Before slinking away, Shaman sends out a mystical call for help, but does not stay to see if it is being answered. He's so sad, Tom.
I don't... The script says, Tom, vamp on Michael being broken and leaving. And, like, I don't know what else to say at this point. I mean...
When Michael fails, he fucks off for 10 years to Banff National Park. They know where to find him, right?
They do know where to find him.
His hut's still there.
You know what? It's actually interesting to me in that there are going to be a lot of changes to the status quo. There are going to be a lot of different takes on characters, but the treatment of shamans so far is pretty damn consistent with what came before. This is a very natural lead on from what we saw in the previous 2 issues, where Michael is just shattered by Elizabeth hauling off on him and taking off. She didn't even take off. She sent him away.
Yeah, and so she's not with them either, and this is a way of taking some extra characters off the board, because when you're coming in on a new book and you have this is 8 characters or something that are expected to appear somewhat regularly. That's a lot to juggle when they're not your characters. Like, Byrne can do it because he knows these guys. So we're getting a couple characters moved off the board here. It also gives some room for Bill to bring in his own characters, because every writer wants to do their own, except for Byrne, right?
But on Michael, I appreciate the idea that a hero can fail, and not only fail, but take serious stock of what that failure means. And in a lot of ways, this has been up to this point a comic book about adults that's dealing with them as adults with some very specifically adult themes. And for that to carry through here is, I don't know, it's almost comforting in a way as far as continuity and storytelling goes.
If Michael's going to be sidelined, this seemed like an okay way for him to be sidelined.
Better this than he gets sent off into space or something absurd, or decides to. I hate it when you do that. All right, let's get back to the issue.
Alpha Flight quickly finds the Hulk in a different part of the city, surrounded by soldiers sent to shoot at the Hulk, despite that not ever working not once in the history of people dealing with the Hulk. As Alpha swoops in on an enraged Hulk, Heather thinks, "Are you watching, Mac? Do you see? Despite defeat and despair and the losses we've suffered, Alpha Flight is a team, at last."
And that's as good a statement of purpose for Mantloooo's approach as any. Byrne's episodic and quick-cut style of storytelling meant the members of Alpha Flight only came together as a team a couple times in almost 3 years. This is Mantlo telling us very clearly that he intends this to be a team book, not a book about individual Canadians.
And that's okay. That's not the book that we've been reading. But it's a different way of telling this story. And if you loop all the way back to, I guess it was our episode number 4 with issue number 1, when we said that the Alpha Flight as a team was not created the same way that most teams in Marvel were created. And that's okay. And it was kind of nice to have a different kind of story where they get woven in and shown as adults from the get-go. And I think that this is kind of the inverse of that, where it's a complete change of pace, but I'm open to it. We saw what Byrne did, and I'm kind of ready for something new.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, taking it seriously, different creators have different approaches. Maybe this is even a choice Byrne would have made. Frankly, I don't care because he's not writing it anymore. But I will also say I don't mind a book about individual Canadians. I like the Canadians. We love you, Canadians. Please
leave us alone. We're 2 of the good ones. Heather calls out orders, and the team responds as if they have done this before. They do what they can, but eventually the Hulk breaks the legs off the box armor, and Roger seems to be going a bit loopy. He says,
"A piece of me here, a piece of me there. Well, that's me all over."
While Puck thinks, "Box is being torn apart and laughing about it. Is he insane, or does he embody the spirit of the new Alpha Flight?"
I groaned at that line. I groaned really hard at that line.
Again, it is very clear that Mantlo is saying, this is what we all about. I said we do an Alpha Flight today. I counted, and there are 11 exclamation points on this page. It's really jarring. I miss Rick Parker already. Though I don't know who decides punctuation, the person writing the script or the letterer. Either way, it makes the dialogue feel really little kiddie.
But based off of the information I provided earlier, is this Mantlo using too many exclamation points, or is this Jim Shooter using too many exclamation points? Anyways.
I think that when you're on the monthly title like this, I think that Mantlo was doing most of the work. I imagine that was when it was like some, Marvel 2-in-1 and Thing and his friends or whatever, where they were like, "Oh shit, Jimmy dropped the ball on it. Bill, what do you got for me?" And Bill's like, "I got it, boss. Here you go."
Yeah. I would hope that's the case.
This is just a Bill Mantlo button on Shooter's desk, and he pushes the button, and Bill just pitches the stupidest thing you've ever heard that Jim takes and turns into something that is less stupid. Still stupid, but less stupid.
Heather calls for their last-ditch play to have Northstar and Aurora touch hands and create an intense flash of light to startle the Hulk into stopping. When they reach out and touch, not only does no light appear, but instead they fall to the ground powerless. So, remember that whole Walter performing science magic on Aurora to separate her powers from her brothers all the way back in issue number 17? How could you forget? We spent a lot of time talking about the ethics of that. Apparently, this is a side effect we haven't seen yet. Northstar remarks that he lost his speed when he saved her earlier, which wasn't something communicated on panel as they immediately started mourning Walt. Both of them, Northstar and Aurora, mourn Walt and their love for him. This is worse than Walt being alive.
Man, you hate Walt.
Why does Northstar love Walt? That's the clear implication from what's happening on the page.
Northstar saved his life from the soul of the Well of Souls because he hated him. Or was Soman lying to us when he said that we needed to have somebody who hated him just to get Alpha Flight split apart? You know what? He's a great beast. He was probably lying.
He was lying to him, and also Northstar was kind of under Snowbird's control at the time.
Yeah, but he still hated Walt.
Of course he hated Walt, but hated him so much because he couldn't have. I don't know. This is so weird. This is weird, and I'm not happy about it.
Tom, you have definitely found a way to make the twins even weirder than they have been. Uncomfortably weird.
I do not think that this is a wild misreading. I really don't.
Love takes many forms, I guess. Hey, it's better than the Ultimate Universe where Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were together.
Yeah, I know. That was pretty bad.
Yeah, this month on the writer's barely disguised fetish. With all of Alpha Flight defeated by the Hulk, Heather stands alone and defiant against the Green Goliath when suddenly, the biggest goddamn Arctic owl you've ever seen swoops down on the scene. Shaman's mystical SOS was received by Snowbird, who has come to save the day. Seeing the Hulk, she immediately decides the only form she could possibly fight him with is her white Sasquatch form, so we get another Hulk Sasquatch fight. Yay! There's even an editor's box telling us the last 2 issues Hulk and Sasquatch have fought.
With White Sasquatch and the Canadian military closing in, the Hulk decides to end this silly fight, and the story ends with, say it with me, folks,
and the Hulk leaps away.
The last 2 pages of this issue are an absolute train wreck. First, Snowbird makes a really long speech that doesn't actually sound like her at all. I think this speech has more words than Snowbird has said in any 6 issues she's appeared in put together. Second, she is making this speech while a helicopter is about to land behind her. Third, the guy in the helicopter could hear her speech and is talking to her before the helicopter blades stop spinning. Those of you who have ever been within a half mile of a helicopter know that this is not how helicopters work.
Yeah, it is jarring going from Chris Claremont telling us everything but the serial number of the plane someone is flying to Mantlo just la-di-dying the very loud physics of helicopter blades and engines. The man emerging from the helicopter is none other than Gary Cody, former liaison between Department H and I think the Prime Minister's office. Cody seems to be the kind of flunky that knows he is a one-trick pony and is making sure his pony doesn't buck too hard and lose them all their phony baloney jobs. Again. And also, listener, remember, never trust a man with 2 first names.
Cody is here to tell Heather and the rest of Alpha Flight that Department H is being refunded with him in charge, and the powers that be want Alpha Flight to come back into the fold and be officially sanctioned again. Also, Heather mentions in a panel that Department H is named as much because of her husband. Directly lays that out. I don't know if that's actually been officially stated previously.
We have said that, and I believe it was said, something along those lines was kind of almost said out loud. But yeah. It has been assumed until this moment that was the case, but Heather makes it clear. Bill Mantlo makes it clear. Heather asks for and receives assurances that Alpha will have a free hand to do what they think is right. I seriously question why a government would not just pay the salaries for, but also assume the liability risk of sponsoring a superhero team and not put any limits on them. It just seems foolish to me. If you're going to pay for the hit squad, then you don't let them choose who to hit. And I guess, later on, Department H is very much going to learn the truth of my statement because they're very much going to take that approach with Alpha Flight, where they tell Alpha Flight who to hit, and that's who to Alpha Flight hits.
I'll also say it's not exactly like Heather got any of this in writing or anything. This is sort of a handshake with Gary Cody.
Yeah, she couldn't hear it because the helicopter was still running, so she doesn't actually know what she agreed
I think she's probably more likely to be able to understand it, though, because she has, spoken to Marina before, and if you can decipher that, then you can totally understand someone through helicopter plates. Heather puts the question to a vote by the team. North Star immediately says, "I don't like it. Where were they when we needed their help?" And Jeffries chimes in with, "Kid's got a point, though. Maybe they just want to keep an eye on you all."
Did Jeffries move up from Iowa, Tom?
Look, man,
I love it. No, that's him. That's it.
I really did not nail the voice last episode. And, Iowa and, the plains of Alberta, I think they probably sound very similar.
I love it. But these responses right here are why North Star and Jeffries are probably our favorite members of this team right now.
Very much so.
Oh, the government wants us to work for them? I don't trust it.
Pound sand.
Nope. Box, though. Box practically salivates at the thought of the research money available to him through the government. So even though Walt is gone, that type of thread is still continuing through this book.
Snowbird asks what the dear departed JMH would have wanted, and Puck says,
"If it'd keep Alpha Flight together, Snowbird, I think he'd say yes." Which is reminiscent of Puck being the final voice in issue number 1 when he insisted the team keep the name Alpha Flight.
As the issue closes, Gary Cody congratulates Heather on having forged Alpha Flight into a family. And she thinks, "Someday soon my kids are going to start to question my place at the head of the table. And then what's the mighty matriarch to do?"
Feeny. Boy, a lot happened this issue.
Bill Mantlo has jumped out of the gate and has let us know what he's wanting to bring to this book. I don't think we saw any sex, death, failure, or team-ups in this issue. Not really. And that's a bold departure from the deep themes of this book.
Look, the Hulk didn't kill anybody, so as far as I'm concerned, it wasn't a failure. No. There's a Hulk problem that popped out. The Hulk is not in your city anymore. You succeeded. Good job.
In a single issue, we got Shaman off the team, Snowbird back, but all weird sounding. I mean, Chris is telling me it is in fact Snowbird, so there's no trickery here. Mantlo just hasn't found a voice for her yet. Or Aurora. Though, given the looming Cher Walter era of Aurora's dialogue, maybe this is for the best.
Yeah, I do not like my Cher Walter. Roger Box having a lot of self-loathing about his physical condition and vocalizing it to others very casually. I really liked how when Roger was introduced, he didn't ever make self-deprecating remarks and just let his work speak for itself in how others think of him. This, "I'm only half a man, woe is me" route is going to be the foundational Roger story until Mantlo writes him out of the book. Bill clearly... Okay, given what you wrote earlier, Tom, I won't say clearly, but past me when he wrote this said that Bill clearly sees Roger in a less charitable light than Jean Byrne did.
Yeah, it's strange, right? And perhaps this is just his take on the character, and it's not like there aren't folks who feel that way in the world, but it's jarring to say the least.
But, we haven't had a whole lot of page time for Roger so far, and as we're establishing the book, maybe this is just Roger getting comfortable with his newfound family enough to let them know about his worries and fears. So, the totally human Heather Hudson being insecure about her place on the team, I think is the biggest piece of all of these. Byrne had her lead the team with stubborn fairness and concern, while Mantlo is going to give her superpowers in I think if not next issue, then the issue after. Because you can't be on a super team and not have superpowers. And this is not about the individuals who make up Alpha Flight anymore. This is about the team of Alpha Flight. So if you're going to be on a super team, you gotta be super.
I think that really nails the difference. What gave it that soap operatic feel that was so different from other books, both at the time and since, was this emphasis on the individual, the vignette structure, the fact that they only come together as a team rarely. Right? This was a book called Alpha Flight that's about the members of Alpha Flight, not about the actions as Alpha Flight.
It seemed very much that when Alpha Flight was conceived by Byrne, they were meant as a team that could stand up to the X-Men. And then when they asked him to do the book, he fleshed out the individuals on the team. But the team itself, when you watch an actual soap opera, it's usually 2 or 3 of the characters getting together to have a conversation, and then you cut to a separate set of characters having a conversation, and then one of the characters from the first one will move over and join the conversation in the second one. And as you watch, I think there's like 35 minutes in an hour-long broadcast of a soap opera. In those 35 minutes, you never get more than about 4 minutes on any given scene, and the scenes all change, and you never have the whole cast come together except for like a season finale. And that is exactly how Byrne structured just about everything he wrote for this book. You didn't see most of them together because they were interacting with each other, and that lets you build up all this great character stuff, but it isn't about the team. You know, it isn't about who barks out orders and what orders happen. It isn't ever about the fight against the big bad. It's about what we're talking about after we fight the big bad.
There's a way in which that's a much more flexible style storytelling, right? You could, if you were to turn Alpha Flight into a TV show, you could make it a workplace comedy a la The Office with a documentary style approach and that sort of like, you know, breaking out of the room and focusing on their individual lives. You could also make it a serious drama about their lives and them navigating the world, the different ways they have to navigate the world as mutants, as superpowered individuals. You have so many different angles of attack with Byrne's approach. Mantloooo's is much simpler and much more streamlined, and that doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it's very, very different than the 28 issues that preceded it.
Okay, we mentioned before about ideas that we think would be fun for fitting Alpha Flight into the MCU, but I just realized where Alpha Flight should be made. It should be made on the CW.
Yeah, that would work.
This show, if you take the arc of the Arrow show and how it gets so wrapped up its ass in all of the soap opera that you forget about the bad guys and the superheroing, that's Alpha Flight! I guess saying that something reminds me of reading a CW show is not considered high praise.
Well, but we're old enough to remember when the CW and the things that preceded it were producing some of the best. A lot of the TV that exists, or you don't even call it TV anymore, but a lot of the shows that exist now don't exist if not for that era of the CW, WB, UPM, whatever.
I enjoyed the first couple seasons of Flash and Arrow. I can't say I followed through on the rest.
Although I want to just jump in real quick. When you brought up that point about Arrow, all my kids have watched all of Arrow, all of Flash. Like, they got super into it. And the funny thing is, I think that's their soap opera. Like, I think that's exactly why they got so into it, is that this is functionally for them what a soap opera is and their experience of it. And those elements combined with the superheroics and combined with the veneer of, you know, comics and all that, that's what gave it the stakes for them to actually keep going back to it over and over again, which is interesting.
And I understand why a lot of people write off CW shows as overwrought drama. It's not like I watched all of them, but yeah, there's something to be said for that soap opera function, and there's a reason that people get hooked on soap operas.
Let's be upfront, guys. The Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, which is basically just, you know, a plagiarized version of the Odyssey. Those are soap operas. That's why they lasted. That's a huge part of why they lasted. The Canterbury Tales is a soap opera. That's a very communicable form of storytelling that humans glom onto and immediately get and run towards. So,
well, I think we've run that point into the ground. And I guess the last point that Mantlo has injected here is the return to government support for the team. And I think that Northstar is right to question Fairweather Friends. This is rooted in consistency and lack of shared concern more than it does out of a concern for his own individual liberty and freedom. It's just like, hey, I was having a shit time, and where were you, Gary Cody? You were not here. So fuck you. And it's a very personal fuck you.
I'm kind of surprised that Jean-Paul didn't immediately launch into French when talking. If he only ever spoke to Gary Cody in French, I would die happy. That would be so petty but beautiful at the same time.
In the 2011 Alpha Flight series, when Northstar is fighting against Alpha Flight because Alpha Flight is rounding up mutants for Department H, one of the Department H people said, okay, you guys all know what Northstar did before he was an Alpha Flight, right? Like, he's a concern of ours.
Yeah, a little bit. Little bit.
Apparently, they think his reputation was a lot bigger than what we think it was, which was mostly everybody around him screwing up and accidentally letting this guy fall out a window. So Jean-Paul is the guy who says, "Fine, we just kid him here."
That's not what we thought that Jean-Paul did, but if you want to apply that logic to...
Oh, in my head, that's been it, that he's the guy standing around saying, "You people are all failures." Oh, fine.
I think Jean-Paul was just a runner, quite frankly. However, it is pretty normal for a government to think that anyone that was involved in any capacity with an organization they considered terrorists would assume that that person is a mortal threat to the country's safety.
Well, everything is terrorism now,
Well,
Tom.
that is absolutely the case.
Well, Jeffries is absolutely correct to be much more suspicious of Department H's goals and takes North Star's completely personal concerns and blows them up to, like, the macro level of saying, "Hey, yeah, I understand. They weren't good friends to us. And also, if they weren't good friends to us, why is it exactly that they want to know what we're doing?"
Jeffrey seems to be almost like an inverse of secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski, which is probably why I like him so much, whom we have theorized has never really been disappointed in life. And thus he trusts Department H because he doesn't know how bad things can get. I mean, Jeffries has known disappointment and unfairness, and he can smell when something is too good to be true.
For the first time, not counting guest appearances, we get to talk about art for a change. I truly enjoy John Byrne's art, but there's only so much you can say about it after 29 issues that isn't just every episode of us saying, "Oh yeah, this art is really great, it's clean." So, Tom, talk to me about art.
I like how you start by, we get to talk about art. Tom, go. Like that's...
Tom, you know more about these formal things than I do.
Well,
I read
I don't know
comic
about
books.
that. You've read, but I would, just to push back a little bit, you've read far more comics than I have and been exposed to a greater variety of styles. Having said that, we're making a pretty radical jump here from the clean, realistic artwork of John Byrne into Mike Mignola's much more stylized approach. There was a good description. It was actually on the Wikipedia entry for Mignola, and so I'm just like taking from that. But I forget but someone compared Mignola's art to a combination of Alex Toth and the original artist for the Prince Valiant comics. So you get this 1940s style, almost noirish thing jammed right up against the realism but fantastical of the original Prince Valiant, which I think is actually a really good one. Alan Moore also compared it, said he was German modernism meets Jack Kirby. And I think both those statements though really kind of get at the cartoony, but with very hard edges, sharp lines that Mignola employs that we really start to see once he starts doing his creator-owned stuff, specifically Hellboy.
Well, and that apparently is a direct response to his time on Alpha Flight.
So Chris pulled up a quote, a couple quotes actually. One was specifically about Mantlo saying that he thinks that this is a superhero team and therefore this is how we're going to approach it, which we've already covered quite extensively. But also, this is what Mignola said about doing Alpha Flight. "I didn't want to do Alpha Flight at all. I think I said no 3 or 4 times, but Bill talked me into it. I did 3 issues and hated almost every second of it. I wasn't cut out to do superheroes. For a while there, I hated to get out of bed in the morning. It was really awful." So, folks, I submit to you that if it had been 6 issues and not 3 that Mignola had to do on this, that we don't get Hellboy. That he walks away and walks off into the sunset and is just done. Just done.
Yeah, just works at Tim Horton. Well, he's not. We're not in Canada anymore because Mignola and Mantlo are neither of them are Canadians, so it's going to get a little weirder for a bit. But I believe the next artist is Canadian.
To circle back to that Hellboy point,
yeah,
Hellboy is obviously what Mike Mignola is best known for, and rightly so. And yes, he absolutely is the creator, owner, all of that of Hellboy, the character, the series, all those good things. But the very first Hellboy series, he wrote the story. Who scripted it, Chris?
Did Bill Mantlo script it?
Nope.
Who scripted it, Tom?
Jean Byrne. So,
all right.
That's the kind of kismet that is just delicious.
Well, taking the issue as a whole, yes, the art was different. Box did maintain his unique look. Like, the characters pretty much looked like how they should, but the panel construction was very different. It didn't have the same depth of field when you're looking at it. It kind of felt like everything was flat across the page. And I hate to say it, Tom, but it really felt like Mignola did not want to be here, even just reading the art without having known that quote ahead of time, it looked like it was churned out for a job and not churned out by somebody who does that. Like the guys over at, Marvel 2-in-1, where they know that's what their job is. And so they do it well enough that you don't get this effect. But I can see where 3 issues of this and Jim Shooter would be saying, this is not working, Mike.
I think the character that stands out as most interesting on the page is the Hulk, which makes sense because McNoll's been doing him for a bit now, which also could explain why Box works, because it's a similar design.
Well, it's not just design. In the Hulk book, if you recall, with the crossroads of reality and everything, there's no computer stuff. There's no city. It's weird, wild, imaginative things and alien creatures, and there's nothing that's too realistic. Even the Hulk himself doesn't have to look like a person. He looks like a monster. And that's what McNoll's better at. And that's why all these weird little demons we were talking last episode about how cool the aliens trying to help the Hulk in that little section are. There's stuff that McNoll's great at. It's just Alpha Flight doesn't deal in that world. And that's not, like, you can tell this is not where he's supposed to be.
Yeah, and to borrow from our friends Rick and Jeff, I think the panel that I find most interesting in this book is the one where Shaman is walking away, like walking off into the darkness and the mist. He's framed by the broken lab and all the machinery. And it looks, like you're saying, it looks much more akin to the Incredible Hulk issue we covered with the strange alien landscapes, and then situating the character within that. Like that's interesting. Directly below that is the Hulk screaming in downtown burning Vancouver. And that's sort of take it or leave it. Like the Hulk looks like the Hulk, but the rest of the surroundings are far less engaging, stuff. Right? It's just there. It's filler.
This is no West Edmonton Mall. You know what I mean? Well, it took some deft brake work and steering and some pretty wild skids, but Bill Mantlo has certainly got this book headed in a direction. And that's something I can honestly say Byrne has not shown for a while. Tom, I'm excited to see where Mantlo takes us next. And honestly, since discovering Chris Claremont is responsible for Tall Puck, I have softened on Mantlo a lot. I mean, sure, there's lots to pick at, but at least the absolute nadir there isn't completely his fault.
Before we wrap this episode, we wanted just to touch on the Alpha Waves letters at the end of this particular issue. There are 2 specific letters on here that I kind of wanted to bring up. They're actually the first 2 featured on the page. Dear Marvel, I do hope you don't intend to kill off one Alpha Flight member each year. I doubt that Canadian superheroes are that prolific. To paraphrase Hercule Poirot, murder is a dangerous habit. You just keep getting better and better. Make mine Marvel. From Bruce Probst up in he's in Lambton, North South Wales, Australia. So there's a little Aussie taking a swipe at Canada, which, Commonwealth, they can do that. Directly below that we have, Dear Marvel, just thought I'd let you know that as of issue number 25, I am no longer buying Alpha Flight. I've been reading comics for over 20 years, and I can assure you that Up from Lazarus's Box was just about the most ridiculous, cowardly cop-out I've ever seen. Guardian's still alive? Ganymede? 10,000 years in the past? Give me a break. The story all seemed to boil down to a certain writer desperately trying to recover a fumble. Ken Lucas, Canfield, Ohio.
Oh, my friend, you are in for a wild ride for literally everything else that ever happens in Alpha Flight.
Well, I'm also going to just argue, that's what broke you? It's not even like this is an unusual thing in the comics at this point. Characters have been coming back to life for some time, but that's what threw you off? I don't know. I thought there were some other, jumping off points earlier on, but to each their own, I suppose. Anyway, folks, the collected editions don't always have the letter pages. If you're able to come across a letter page, or you're picking up an old single issue you've been dying to check out, definitely read the letters. There's such a fascinating snapshot. They give such depth and history to what's going on here. We do it occasionally, but it's worth it, y'all. It's very, very fun.
And reading through this stuff as an adult, if you're reading a book for 40, 50 issues or something straight through, reading the bullpen bulletins and reading the editors and whatnot and what they're writing back and forth to each other and talking about the other creators. As a kid, that stuff didn't really land with me because I didn't really understand these were real people, But as an adult, it really helped tie a lot of this network together and helps you see why Marvel is known for this. But I am a Bronze Age baby. I love my 80s Marvels.
And one last letter that I'd forgotten about. Dear Alpha Waves, why pick on Sasquatch? He doesn't deserve a lot of the things that happened to him. In issue number 20, he is turned to gold. In issue number 23, Snowbird kills him. Now his spirit is trapped forever inside Box? When will it end? Please find a way to restore his body. And I didn't know that I had a nemesis, but apparently Chris Beyer of Connecticut is absolutely my nemesis moving forward.
Well, I'm certain that somebody who liked Alpha Flight enough in 1986 to write a letter in is probably listening to the podcast now. So Chris Beyer, who lived in Niantic, Connecticut, if you happen to be listening to the show, please email us, because we'd love to put you and Tom on the microphone together to talk about the merits versus demerits of Walt.
Oh, and Chris, we both went to Trinity College, so we know your state. And we know your state well. So
yeah, we know where you're at, where you were at 40 years ago.
before that goes into darker areas.
Excuse me, do you post on the internet as Magnolia Lover? We're just beating up an old man in his home.
Hopefully
That's not how I meant to end this episode, but thank you, Tom.
Well, thanks for listening to our show, folks. We do hope you'll come back next time. And if you haven't yet, please take a moment to rate and review our show wherever you're listening to us right now. And if you can tell just one of your comic nerd friends about us this week, it will do more good than any advertisement we could pay for. But speaking of advertisements...
Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom is brought to you by the Excelsior Embroidery Company. Disclaimer, while the Excelsior Embroidery Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Roxxon Corporation, our lawyers say it is not subject to the ruling of the people of Montana versus the Roxxon Corporation, nor is it able to be held legally liable for the cleanup costs. Choose from dozens of distinct comic-inspired designs available on hundreds of items at excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com. Listeners of Why Not can use the discount code WHYNOT20 to get 20% off any 2 items. When company's coming over, bring out the good towels. Excelsior!
Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is written by Chris Baker and produced by Tom Flynn, with additional cat noises provided by a chunky calico named Teeny, who Chris almost murdered today before we started recording.
She sits under my chair. It's a wheeled chair. Why would she sit there, Tom?
Why Not is released every other Monday at www.thewhynotpod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Blue Sky or email us at whynotapod@gmail.com. That's whynotehpod@gmail.com. We love to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions.
Join us next time when we dive into Madison Jeffries' backstory, have some horrific body horror, see an old villain, and gasp, move into a new headquarters with schematics and stuff, just like the real super teams, Tom.
See you next time.
So, Tom, earlier I did remind the listeners to never trust a man with 2 first names. I have to ask, does Tom Flynn count as 2 first names?
No. People who are given Flynn as their first name, that a terrible injustice has been done to them. Flynn is a last name. Flynn is actually a descriptor. It means red-faced. So you just name your kid red-faced when you give it that first name. So, just saying.
Well, and there is also a trend that a certain class of family will give their boys last names as first names. When we went to college with that class of people, if somebody had introduced themselves as Baker Joneserton, you would have been like, oh, your name is Baker Joneserton. I know everything about your family. You have lived in on Nantucket for the last 300 years, haven't you? And he's like, yes, how'd you know? And yeah, Baker Joneserton never has a worry in life.
Yeah.
So if you have a last name as a first name, that's a different thing than 2 first names.
Although there's also the added level of the number of people we knew who went by their middle name because their first name is used by like 8 other men in their family. So it was either a very odd nickname or using your middle name as the distinctive component. It is, however, now my goal in life to meet Flynn Thomas and really find out how much damage has been done to them by that naming.
He's very tall and blonde.
Okay, if you want to get personal.